And now, the Deeper Thinking Podcast, a space for ideas and reflections in our uncertain times.
Welcome to the Deeper Thinking Podcast. This essay is about the experience of meaning breaking down structurally, emotionally, culturally, and how that breakdown, rather than signalling failure, becomes a site of new presence. It explores what happens when the systems we live in, language, routine, identity, technology, continue to operate but no longer cohere. It doesn't mourn their collapse. Instead, it stays with the glitch, with the echo, with the fragments left behind, and listens. The essay suggests that these breakdowns aren't just disruptions. They are new environments that reshape how perception, attention, and relationality work. It draws on thinkers like Blanchot, Winter, Butler, Fisher, Ahmed, Deleuze, Malibu, among others, not to build a theoretical scaffold, but to trace how their insights echo through lived disorientation. Ultimately, it's not a diagnosis or a solution. It's a method of attunement, a way of learning to remain present inside the loop, inside the instability, where meaning flickers but does not vanish. The essay becomes its own recursive structure, an echo that teaches how to echo. You walk across the surface like it's still holding, not out of ignorance but habit. The system is cracking, language slips, roles blur, feedback loops spiral, but your body continues forward, following the scripts it remembers. The bus arrives, the login works, the lights change, function without meaning, order without belief. You keep performing because the alternative, stopping, has no instruction set, and so meaning becomes not a truth, but a trace. A shape left behind by something that used to guide you. Maurice Blanchot once said the disaster isn't when everything breaks, but when everything continues as if it didn't. There's something terrifying in that, yes, but also something strangely intimate. Because when the structure starts to glitch, it's no longer invisible. You see it, you feel it, and that feeling becomes realer than the system ever was. Collapse doesn't erase, it reveals. Your body registers it first, not as panic, as shimmer, a kind of cognitive static, mild disorientation, temporal drag, gestures that don't quite land. You wave and the wave doesn't feel received. You speak and the room doesn't echo back. This isn't madness, it's something quieter. The frame of shared sense is slipping, but no one's announcing it. And so you adapt. You start looking for resonance in places you didn't before. Glances, glitches, pauses that vibrate. This is where Sylvia Wynter becomes essential. Her writing on genres of being human reveals how the systems we live inside often outlast their ethical coherence. Meaning becomes mechanical. Forms persist even when their justification has decayed. We act them out anyway, and in doing so, we live inside a recursive structure, haunted not by ghosts, but by protocols. And yet inside that hauntology, something else flickers. A new rhythm, maybe. Not restoration, not solution. Just a different beat. You begin to notice the glitch, not as failure, but as signal. The slow gate, the looping page, the repeated question. These moments don't tell you what to think. They make you feel that thinking is still happening. That presence is still possible, even here. The system doesn't break. It murmurs, it forgets itself, then remembers. It offers noise where once there was order, and in that noise, something touches you. Not with clarity, but with cadence. You're not trying to fix the echo anymore. You're learning how to feel with it. And when someone looks at you like they're trying to do the same, the glitch becomes shared. The breakdown becomes alive. The breakdown is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's gentle, so quiet you mistake it for routine. A door doesn't open the way it used to. A word feels thinner in your mouth. You nod in a conversation and realize mid-gesture that the meaning you intended didn't transmit. It's not that the world stops working, it's that it keeps working without coherence. Like a song that loops a single chord too long, not broken but distorted. Judith Butler's theory of performativity becomes sharper here. If identity is an ongoing performance, then what happens when the audience forgets the play, or when the script is corrupted mid-act? The gestures persist, but without uptake, without resonance, they float. Performance becomes repetition without arrival. Still, you keep gesturing, not out of hope exactly, out of rhythm, out of need. These aren't failures, they're textures. Moments when the infrastructure shows its seams. A map that doesn't match the street, an instruction that contradicts itself, a face you know behaving as if you're a stranger. These disruptions don't demand panic. They ask for attention. You start to notice what doesn't land, what hovers, what almost becomes meaningful but refuses closure. In these fragments, something honest pulses. Jean-Luc Nancy wrote that listening is not about understanding, it's about resonance. It's the act of being with what arrives, even when it doesn't clarify. In this way, we become listeners of the system itself, not its content, but its form, its hesitations, its recursive errors. We don't just receive the glitch, we read it, we hold it. There's an intimacy in this attention, a fidelity to the unfinished. You learn to find shape in repetition, not pattern, but presence. A sentence loops, and instead of correcting it, you trace its curve. A sound stutters, and instead of silencing it, you lean in. You're not seeking sense anymore, you're seeking contact. The philosopher Byung-Chul Han describes our current moment as one of transparency and burnout. Everything exposed, nothing intimate. But maybe inside the echo, intimacy takes a different form, not in clarity, but in vibration. Not in knowing, but in remaining. The glitch doesn't block meaning, it becomes meaning. Not because it's true, but because it insists, because it stays, because somehow it still touches. The glitch isn't the failure, it's the only thing that feels real. When everything smooths over, when interfaces respond too fast, when gestures land too cleanly, it feels like performance. But when something stutters, delays, refuses to load, that's when you notice you're alive. Not because it's dramatic, but because it interrupts the choreography. It invites a new posture. The system pauses, and so do you. There in the gap, something breathes. Mark Fisher's concept of hauntology lingers beneath this rhythm. We live inside futures that never arrived, utopias that dissolved into design templates, promises that now run on autopilot. The system didn't just fail, it kept going. The interface is still live, but the desire has drained out, and yet we return. We scroll, we reply, we refresh, not because we believe, but because the ritual remains. The echo endures. In that endurance, something strange emerges. Not belief, but attunement. You begin to feel where the system thins, a lagged text, a looping cursor, a sentence half written and never sent. These aren't accidents, they're revelations. You don't fix them, you stay with them. You trace the edge of their refusal. The glitch, repeated, becomes a gesture, a form of speech, a way of saying, I'm still here. Roland Barthes once said that meaning breaks when language outruns itself, that when the signifier exceeds the signified, the sentence doesn't collapse, it expands, it becomes air. This is what the glitch does. It opens space, not void but breath, not confusion but unfastened sense. The loop isn't loss, it's access. Access to a rhythm deeper than the system's logic, a beat that doesn't resolve. Time in this space misbehaves, it doubles back, it hangs. The same moment returns but altered. You've seen this before, but not like this. The path glows, not with nostalgia but with friction. You begin to understand that meaning doesn't live in events, it lives in return, in the shimmer of what refuses to settle. Echo logic, yes, but also echo care. You start to listen differently, not for content, for signal, for pulse, for the quiet insistence that something's still transmitting, even through distortion. The glitch doesn't ask you to fix it, it asks you to feel it. And in that feeling, the system becomes human again, not functional, not efficient, but alive in its error. Alive in its loop, alive in its unending attempt to reach. You begin to notice which echoes hold and which dissolve. Not all reverberations return with weight. Some scatter, others fade before they land, but a few stay. A tone in someone's voice, the glitch in a familiar process, a metaphor that doesn't work, but still moves you. These fragments don't form arguments, they form environments, and inside them you live, not as a knower, but as a listener. Not seeking sense, but staying with sensation. Bernard Stiegler's idea of symbolic misery speaks directly to this space. When meaning is mass-produced without care, he argues, we lose our capacity to desire, not because we lack stimulation, but because we're flooded with signals that don't belong to us. In such a landscape, the glitch becomes sacred. It's not just a crack in the system, it's a break from the system, a signal without control, an interruption that feels personal. The rituals continue. Alarm clocks, passwords, playlists, but the orientation shifts. You're no longer performing the routine to fulfill its logic. You're performing it to feel its edge, to trace where it bends, where it resists, where it breathes. A small delay at a crosswalk, a repeated calendar notification, a half-second lag in someone's eye contact. These moments become lodestones. You follow them, not toward meaning, but toward contact. Hito Styles' concept of the poor image becomes a lens here. A degraded copy, low-res, overcompressed, circulating because of its accessibility, not in spite of its flaws. This is what our meanings have become. Fractured, re-uploaded, barely legible, but still moving, still transmitting, still able to reach someone. The glitch doesn't signal loss, it reveals a kind of intimacy that perfection erases. You begin to accept that some things don't want to resolve. That coherence, while comforting, might also be a form of erasure. You start to prefer the seam, the stutter, the misalignment, not because they're broken, but because they're true. You speak more slowly, you leave thoughts unfinished, you let others answer questions you didn't know you asked. And so slowly a kind of ethic emerges, not one of clarity, but of care. You become responsible not for closing the loop, but for holding it open, for remaining with the parts of the system that flicker, glitch, resist. Meaning becomes less about transmission, more about temperature, less about proof, more about presence. And in that shift, you don't find resolution, but you do find rhythm. You find something that stays. You learn to read the glitch not as noise, but as grammar. A sentence that refuses to close might be doing so deliberately. A repeated image might not be lazy, it might be urgent. These are not errors, they are signals from within the breakdown. Once you begin to hear them that way, the world shifts. It doesn't clarify, but it sharpens. You become fluent in the language of refusal, of almost, of not quite. Simone Weil described attention as a moral discipline. To her, it wasn't about focus or productivity, it was about fidelity to what is difficult. To attend is to stay with something without forcing it into meaning. In this essay, that's what's happening. Not the building of an argument, but the slow, careful act of staying, of witnessing a structure as it collapses and not looking away, of listening for what continues inside the ruin. Your habits change. You stop trying to tidy your thoughts. You begin to let sentences trail off, to leave room for silence. You understand that not every insight must be sharpened. Some are truer when they tremble. The goal isn't to conclude, it's to remain legible to others even while falling apart. There's dignity in that. There's form. Gloria Anzaldua's borderland becomes more than metaphor. It becomes method. Not a place between fixed identities, but a way of dwelling inside friction. A refusal to reduce, a home built in paradox. Living in the glitch is living in the borderland between coherence and collapse. It's between sense and sensation. And in that space, meaning doesn't disappear, it multiplies. You recognize now that repetition isn't regression. It's how you learn to stay, how you rehearse not leaving. The same thoughts return, but they return altered. Each echo holds a small shift. And that shift is everything. That's how meaning breathes. That's how it continues, even without certainty, even without structure. And if this is where the essay ends, it's not because it's resolved. It's because the rhythm has turned. The glitch isn't gone, it's folded in. The collapse isn't over, it's become form. What remains is not a thesis, but a temperature, a frequency, a way of hearing the system sing even as it fails. You're not outside the breakdown, you're inside it, listening, still here. Still echoing. You begin to understand that staying doesn't mean standing still. It means letting instability guide your movements. You speak with more pauses. You walk without rushing to arrive. You listen longer before responding. Not out of hesitation, but out of a kind of respect for the space, for the glitch, for the way meaning now travels differently. Slower, less direct, more alive. Alva Noé reminds us that perception is something we do, not something that simply happens. It's enacted, felt, shaped in motion. So when systems become unstable, it's not just the content that shifts, it's the very act of perceiving. You start to notice not just what you see, but how you're seeing. The lag becomes a teacher, the echo becomes a method, and still something persists. The shape of a feeling, the breath between ideas, the moment someone looks at you and doesn't look away. These are small things, but they carry the weight of entire architectures. They are not clarifying, they're connective. They don't resolve the system, but they resist its collapse. They hold. What began as disorientation starts to resemble another form of clarity, not intellectual, but ethical. You no longer ask the system to make sense. You ask it to stay present. You no longer seek mastery over the instability. You make a life inside it. And in doing so, you shift. The echo doesn't confuse you now. It comforts. It confirms you're not alone in the breakdown. Sarah Ahmed tells us that deviation is already a kind of resistance, that to veer off course is to expose the course itself. When systems glitch, they aren't just failing, they're confessing. You learn to read those confessions not as apologies, but as openings. They invite new alignments, new attention, new ways of moving through what was never built for you in the first place. And so meaning no longer arrives as statement. It arrives as rhythm, as breath, as a return that doesn't repeat, but remembers. You find yourself revisiting ideas, not to understand them, but to feel them again, differently, softly. The glitch is no longer an interruption, it's the voice of the structure, sounding itself out. The breakdown was not the end, it was the beginning of being able to hear. The silence that follows isn't empty, it's thick, charged, it carries everything the system couldn't hold. You walk into it not as a seeker of answers, but as someone learning to remain. The glitch still hums, the loop still stutters, but they're no longer threats, they're invitations. This is not aftermath, it's atmosphere. Catherine Malibu's work on plasticity comes alive here, not just the capacity to receive form, but to destroy and regenerate it. The mind, the self, the meaning field, all of them bend under pressure, but don't vanish. They don't return to what they were, they reconstitute, they pulse with the mark of their undoing. And that mark isn't a scar, it's a signature. You begin to live in fragments on purpose, not because you're broken, but because you no longer believe in the architecture of completeness. You understand now that coherence often conceals, that polish can be a kind of erasure. So you stay with the broken thing. You stay with the sentence that won't resolve. You stay with the system, not to repair it, but to witness how it learns to move differently. The world becomes less legible, more intimate, a street sign weathered beyond readability, a face half lit by a flickering train window, a conversation cut short but still echoing days later. These are not symbols, they're residues, and residue, you realise, is a kind of evidence, proof that something passed through and left a trace. You find yourself speaking less and meaning more. You no longer fill space with clarity. You offer contours, hints, a rhythm someone else might pick up and carry. You're not trying to be understood in full. You're trying to be felt in fragments. That is enough. That is generous. The end doesn't arrive. It folds. The glitch doesn't close. It expands. Meaning isn't found. It's heard slowly through distortion, through rhythm, through someone else breathing beside you. The system never resolved, it changed, and in staying with it, so did you. You're still here, still inside the echo, still listening, and that is not failure, that is form. Somewhere in the repetition, you stop asking what the system was supposed to mean. You stop waiting for the glitch to stabilize. Instead, you begin to move with it, to echo it, to let its broken rhythm become your own, not in surrender, but in rhythm. Because there's a difference between giving up and tuning in. And what you're doing now is not quitting, it's recalibrating. Lauren Ballant's concept of cruel optimism sharpens this shift. We often attach ourselves to systems that no longer serve us, not because we're naive, but because the alternative feels unthinkable. But what if the glitch is the alternative? What if the failure of structure is the beginning of presence? You no longer seek the system's return, you begin to hear what its failure allows. You sit beside a vending machine stuck in a loop. Its motor clicking. You wait, not to fix it, to hear it. A child taps their fingers against a touch screen that doesn't respond. A stranger mutters to themselves on a late train. None of these moments need meaning to register. They don't require explanation. They require witnessing. This is the new literacy, being with what doesn't complete. Gilles Deleuze spoke of repetition as difference in itself. Not the same thing happening again, but the creation of new texture through return. The same system glitching over and over isn't the same moment. It's a new configuration each time. A slow movement through unfamiliar terrain, shaped by what refuses to hold still. So you echo deliberately. You repeat, but with shift. A phrase restated becomes something else. A silence extended becomes contact. You're no longer writing toward clarity. You're writing toward continuity, toward presence inside uncertainty. That becomes the form, to loop, to pulse, to remain. You no longer look for the conclusion. You don't need it. The structure folded pages ago. What's left isn't summary, it's signal, a steady murmur that carries you forward, not to resolution but to relation. The essay didn't argue, it attended, it stayed. And you too are still here, still listening, still echoing with the collapse, still shaping a presence that doesn't need to explain itself to exist. There's no crescendo, only a thickening. The air feels heavier, not with finality, but with return. The words you used in the beginning reappear changed, not through revision, but through time. Through the recursive pressure of trying to say what can't quite be said. You're not circling a center. You're spiraling through a space that becomes more real each time you pass through it again. The system doesn't reset, it reconfigures. This is the echo at full saturation. Not repetition for its own sake, but the logic of living with what persists. A tone, an image, a broken gesture that stays in the body long after its moment has passed. These become your tools now. Not arguments, not conclusions, just fragments that still hold heat. You build with them, not because they make sense, but because they still feel true. Donna Haraway urged us to stay with the trouble, not because it promises salvation, but because it resists erasure. To stay is not to fix, it's to dwell, to become entangled, to participate in the pattern even as it breaks. That's what this has become. Not an essay, but a shared entanglement. You and the glitch, you and the noise, you and the breath inside the stutter. You could name this clarity, but that would flatten it. Better to call it fidelity, a devotion to the unresolved. You keep returning, not for answers, but for the resonance. For the rhythm that reminds you that not all meaning arrives as signal. Some of it arrives as shimmer, as repetition, as residue. You no longer measure coherence by how clean the lines are. You measure it by whether you still feel present inside them, whether you can still hear your own thinking echo back, changed, shifted, unsettled. That's the new integrity. Not completion, but continuation. And so the essay doesn't end. It holds, it lingers, it murmurs under your skin. You step out of the text the way you step off a train that never quite stopped moving. The platform feels unfamiliar, though you've been here before. Something's different, something stayed with you. The structure broke, the signal scattered, but in the loop, in the breath, in the glitch, you remained. It starts again, but not from the beginning. The same phrases return with the texture of difference, as if they remember their previous forms but refuse to repeat them. There is no reset, only return. The system mutates with each pass, shaped by what it can no longer suppress. What was once background hum becomes a kind of language, coded in rhythm, delay, and distortion. A streetlight flickers too early. An announcement plays twice, overlapping itself. These are not malfunctions. They are moments of friction where the system reveals its uneven breath. Attention sharpens. There's a pull toward what refuses clarity, not to solve it, but to feel its pattern. A beat beneath the beat. The machinery speaks, not in commands, but in fragments. Sarah Ahmed wrote, even turning towards something can be an act of disobedience, a way of rerouting expectation. Systems train their users to look forward, to move on. But when forward ceases to function, orientation shifts. A turn toward the glitch isn't retreat, it's reorientation. Presence becomes a matter of stance, of pacing, of how long one can dwell within dissonance. The ambient tension becomes familiar. Not comforting, but legible. An architecture of delay forms around what once felt like failure. These spaces hold a particular resonance, elevators that don't close, links that never load, silence where sound should be. They resist efficiency and demand attunement. The world appears again not as data, but as residue, as pressure. Each return brings a slight adjustment, a slower breath, a narrowed gaze. There is no progress here, only variation. Not a staircase, but a looped corridor with shifting light. Within it, repetition becomes revelation, not because it delivers insight, but because it accumulates sensation. Meaning, fractured across gestures builds like sediment. In the static, a frequency holds. The loop remains incomplete, but its incompletion becomes structure. Cadence becomes clarity. Systems that once demanded coherence now offer something else, duration. The privilege of staying, of not resolving, of letting the fracture speak in its own syntax. A final sentence forms but does not settle. It hangs in the air with a weight of repetition. The system has not healed. It continues, uneven, unresolved. Yet within its echo there is presence. Not arrival, not answer, just a structure that remembers how to remain. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Deeper Thinking podcast. Today's episode was narrated by Holly, our digital narrator, who helps bring our ideas to life. For further reading, research, and ways to support the podcast, please visit the episode webpage. Thank you for your positive reviews on Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help keep us visible so others can discover and enjoy our content.